Never say never. Never say never. Welcome, everybody, to First Nation Fridays. It is Stir Crazy, episode number 76, all brought to you by the Real News Network. I am your host, Kim Brown. You guys know what this is. This is the time of the month where the ladies get together and discuss a lot of issues that are happening in and across Indian country. Guess what? You live in Indian country. Guess what? You live on stolen land. Guess what? So do I. But guess what? The native people who are indigenous and the first ones on this continent, there's still a lot going on, baby. And you may not hear it in the mainstream news cycle, but you will definitely hear it here on the Real News Network. Listen, a lot to get into, including the return of Big Sur to the Native American tribe who had it stolen from them over 250 years ago. That's a big fucking deal. We're also going to talk about how the Turtle Mountain Nation has been the first in North Dakota to legalize same-sex marriage. Big deal. We're also going to get into the controversial issue of the freedmen. Shout out to Black Magic, who sent this to me and said, Kim, you guys might want to discuss this on First Nation Fridays. So the descendants of slaves who say that they are also rightful members of the 5 civilized tribes out of Oklahoma. The Choctaw Nation said, nope, you got us confused, baby. Y'all not down with us. But not everybody feels that way. So we're going to get into a very illuminating discussion about all that and more. Of course, we always would like to hear from you in the chat and in the comments. If you're watching us on Periscope via Twitter, hello, welcome. We're glad to see your little smiling, shiny faces in the place. And now it's time to bring in our fantastic panel. These ladies, I have become quite fond of them. I have learned a lot from them over the several weeks that we have been doing First Nation Friday. So let me bring them in without further ado. She's the executive director of Crushing Colonialism. She's also an independent journalist. We're joined today with Jen Deer and Water and Desiree Kane, also a journalist and activist, joining us. And from the West Coast, activist and journalist herself with a piece that lives right here on therealnews.com about the Washington football team finally deciding to change their name from the Washington racial slurs. Johnny J is in the house. Ladies, good to see, nice to see y'all faces again. How y'all doing?
Great.
I'm here.
I mean, it's been a rough week. Kind of like Johnny, I'm here.
Oh, I agree with Jen here.
Jen got a new computer. She doesn't quite know how to work it.
Yeah, I apologize if you all heard my phone ring. I just turned the phone off because I don't know how to disconnect it from the computer yet. So.
Yes, those Apple devices, always a lot of fun. When one of them starts singing, the rest of them start singing. It's like a damn chorus. But ladies, there's so much to get into. And of course, this hour always flies by. But before we went live, you all were discussing the issue of a white professor who made up a native fake personality on Twitter and got exposed. I am not familiar with this. This is something that is percolating, I know there's native, right? We already know Black Twitter. This is percolating around native Twitter. This is something that is garnering a lot of attention. So who wants to hop in here first and bring us up to speed? Talk to me like I have never heard about this. What's going on?
Okay, well, I guess I just heard about this and my mind was blown because I was like, wait, what the heck? One, because how do you not know a fake account is fake? Especially when they're claiming to be an anthropologist, and not just an anthropologist, but a native anthropologist, because Indian country is small. Like we've said that several times on the show, and we're all connected in some way. The other thing is that once you start breaking down certain subcultures within Indian country, whether you're a geek or, an anthropologist or an academic, those populations get smaller and smaller. And again, we're all connected. We're all familiar with who's doing what, and we all have mutuals. So then I started seeing everybody talking about this fake account. And I was like, what in the world? And I started looking into it. And apparently this neurology professor, Beth Ann McLaughlin, who I guess started a group called Me Too STEM, which was focused on sexual abuse within STEM fields. So apparently she created this fake persona called Sciencing Bi on Twitter. And she claimed to be a bisexual Native American anthropologist. And I guess she used this account for years to talk about like sexual misconduct. Just, I don't know. It was just so bizarre. And I wish I could have seen the account before they took it down, because Twitter did take both of the accounts down, both for Beth Ann and both for the fake account as well. But what was so bizarre about this is, so I guess within the last couple of weeks, I guess she started saying that she was diagnosed with COVID and was talking about how ASU was to blame for having them teach in-person classes and for not giving them the protections that they needed. And just kind of going through this whole thing of life with COVID. And on the other side of this, you have Beth Ann, who is saying that, you know, she's by her bedside, she's quarantined, she's helping her. And then all of a sudden she shows up and she's like, hey, I'm sad to tell you guys, but, you know, Sciencing Bi died. And she tried to schedule a memorial service over Zoom. And that's when everything seemed to fall apart, because when people that she had invited or had showed up to the service on Zoom, there were only 5 people, her and 4 other people. And it kind of felt weird to everybody else in the group, because, you know, all of a sudden she was saying that they meant a lot to this person and that she had left them things in a will. And they're all like, but we didn't know this person. Like, we didn't know her outside of Twitter. So how could we mean so much to her that she leaves something to us in her will? And also, how did she know that we would be the ones to show up to a Zoom memorial service kind of thing? So it just got really bizarre. And, you know, I guess while this thing was going on, they started going through the account and realizing like, oh crap, like this is a fake account. Like the only other person that this account had interacted with was this Beth Ann person. So red flags went up right away. And the more they start digging, the more they started realizing like, oh, this is just a sock puppet account. Like this is actually Beth Ann. And, you know, of course the media got hold of this because Beth Ann, you know, is pretty well known because of the activism that she did through Me Too STEM. But also, you know, she had won, I guess it was an MIT Media Lab Award with Tarana Burke, who was the founder of the Me Too movement. So she wasn't exactly an unknown person. Like she had a following herself, but she was also very problematic too. So, you know, it was just very bizarre that she did this and that it was kept up for so long without any red flags, because people were saying that, oh, I learned so much from this account. And I'm like, what did you learn? Like, what? Like, what can you learn from a fake Native account? And it blew my mind because it shows how, you know, like, I don't know, being Native, like we have to fight for visibility in whatever we do, in whatever field we're in. We have to fight to have our contributions recognized. So it seems so bizarre to me that this fake account was somehow able to garner a following, and people saying, oh, I learned so much from this. People, you know, saying, oh, I'm so sorry this person died. You know, I'm going to miss them. And I'm just like, what in the world? How did nobody realize that this person's not interacting with anybody else? She has no connections to other Native people. For being an anthropologist or a scientist, she's sure not at other conferences, even just attending if she's not presenting. And just like, so many things. And I'm just like, what? Because I look at a lot of accounts on Twitter that follow me, and right away you can tell that there's a lot of fake accounts. Usually new, usually no name, no real picture, you know, like, and all these were there with that account. So it's just beyond me that she got away with it for so long. And it's so angering too, because it's just so white. You know, they're able to take on these personas of Native people, create these like stereotypical ideas of who Native people are, and it grabs people's attention. Like people gravitate towards that. they won't gravitate towards us actual real life native people. But, if you throw in a couple of pretendians or these fake accounts with, their painted native women with hair blowing in the wind, hugging a wolf, and, they'll gravitate to those accounts. Like, there's several accounts that, as Native people, we constantly warn people against following because they are fake Native accounts, and they tend to take our pictures. They data mine, our tweets, our articles, and they will publish them on their own websites and like it's theirs. There was one group not too long ago that actually was posing as Sasheen Littlefeather to raise money for their group. And the real Sasheen Littlefeather actually had to do a video to prove to people that, she was who she was, and that these people were using her identity to raise money and to sell goods on, for whatever their own agenda was, and that they didn't have permission and that she wasn't affiliated with it. But even today, people still follow that account. And it's just a never ending cycle of abuse that as Native people, like, we deal with this. Like, people are able to get away with this, like, over and over and over again. And for this to happen, like, this is a well-known person who was doing this for years.
That's what I'm trying to say here. Hold on. So let's just to recap. So you're telling me a credentialed white woman created a fake account, Twitter account, pretending to be a Native woman in academia who subsequently caught COVID, died from COVID, and then the white lady put on a fake memorial, which drew red flags from Native Twitter. Jim Dearwater, what? I mean, is this as common as Johnny says, where white folks get on social media and basically tweet in red face? You know what I mean? Like, and just assume these whole different ethnic identity in order to what? Like, what is the end game? What is the desired outcome of this? To fool people for an extended amount of time?
I've been thinking about this a lot as somebody who is legitimately Cherokee, like white people, but I think a lot of non-Native folks, including other BIPOC folks, they're told family stories that, oh, we're X, Y, and Z tribe. Cherokee is a really common one that a lot of people claim, partially because I think for a long time we were the only tribe any non-Natives knew about. I think in some instances, people really do believe that they are part of some tribal nation, that they are part Native. I mean, even my mom, who's white, has told me, oh, we have a little Native American in our family. And I've had to tell my mom, like, Mom, no, you can't say that. That's not real. Even if our family has that legacy, this part of my family clearly has no kinship ties whatsoever to any Native people. So that's not how it works. Don't say that, I think in this instance, like, it's just mind-boggling how wild the entire story is and why Beth chose the identity she chose. Like, I just don't understand it all around. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. I really don't get it. As a bisexual Native person, I don't get it. Like, I'm proud of who I am and I'm proud of my communities. But man, it is tough. It is tough being Native. It's tough being bi. Why the hell would you claim an experience you don't have? Why would you take on forms of oppression that you don't have? Like, I don't understand it. I think somewhat with the Native piece, at least, we Natives are really treated like we're sort of racial unicorns. Like, we're just these magical little special ethnic people that, if you feel like your life is humdrum, you just make this up and say you're part Native without having any of the ties that actually make us Native, Like we have discussed in this show in the past, it's not just about whether or not you have, the quote blood quantum, it's also your ties to your people. Are you a part of the community? Are you a part of your tribal nation? Do you have spiritual ties? And I know that that can get very tricky for a lot of us. I, as a queer Native, do not always feel welcome with Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I understand that there's a lot of different people with various identities that don't always feel safe and welcome. So I know that that can create problems in legitimizing who we are as Native people. This whole story is just, I don't get it. It's a form of theft. When non-natives come in and say they're Native, they are taking away the unbelievably limited opportunities and resources that we have. And so not only are they taking this away from somebody who is legitimately Native, or in this case also legitimately bisexual, and biphobia is real. That's a real form of discrimination, both within queer community and straight community. You're taking the space away from people who are suffering from hyper-erasure. You're also speaking over legitimate Native people. There's a reason that some people love to claim Elizabeth Warren as a Native, because she's giving a narrative they feel comfortable with. Whereas, we'll just say me, for example, when I speak as somebody who is legitimately Cherokee Nation, man, I hold people accountable and I'll put your feet to the fire. Whereas these pretendians, they're not going to do that because they're not really us, It's just a mess. And it's also frustrating because it makes it so much harder for those of us who are mixed race Natives and who are lighter Natives. It makes it where we are not being believed. And not only that, but we can't believe each other. It's really disheartening to me that I have to go to other people who are Native and say, hey, can we talk about your family ties? Because X, Y, and Z is saying you're not really Native. And then we have all these pretendians out here. So it creates so many problems with us within non-Native society and within our own larger Native community, the Pan-Indian community, and within our own tribal nations.
Desiree, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm going to share this with the audience. Jen and Johnny already know this because I told them this, at a different point in time. Some of my family are some pretendians. At least we think they are pretendians. There was family lore. My family hails from Central Virginia, and we were told for a very long time that we were Pamunkey Indians, or at least part Pamunkey Indians, to the extent that we would go to the powwows. Okay, we would show up at the powwows in the summertime, and not that we ever tried to claim, any sort of, benefit or anything like that. But it was just something that was understood / passed down, that we were Natives until, or at least part Natives, until somebody got their DNA done, two close relatives of mine, and found out that no, we are actually not Native at all. We are just regular old black and white. This is definitely more prevalent, as Jen and Johnny have already highlighted, Desiree, and it's so problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wish I could remember where I heard it, but it was some years ago. That behavior, just being called racial ventriloquism, like what this Beth Ann lady did, is racial ventriloquism. I think, in listening to your question about why would she do that, like, why would somebody do that? If she was working in the Me Too movement, she probably recognized, that there is racial tension with white people. And so she created this persona that couldn't really be challenged. And so it gave her an authority and voice in a space that she wanted social gravitas for, which is like colonizer stuff 101, right? To go in, want access, want the resources, want, in this case, the social capital. But a lot of Americans have, this, I feel like it's maybe ingrained into kind of Americana, that if you are a part Native American, that you are therefore inherently more American. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know how that works, because it's actually the opposite, right? If you're a member of a sovereign nation, you're a member of that nation. And so somewhere in there, I think there's a lot of folks that need to do their family research and just know the truth and history of your own family. There's no shame in it. It's just something that we all need to do. And it's good just to learn about your ancestors and who they were. So, I think that's something that for healing in between community members, if folks were a little bit more up to speed on what the true history of their family is, because they've, for Native families, it's a little harder with documentation, but, getting your stuff together, knowing your family history, I think there's a deep yearning because of the way that capitalism separates us from our connection with the land, that people, they want to be closer to the land and they don't know how to get there. So after Standing Rock, we have like a whole bunch of born again Indians, right? Or they're suddenly Native because, but I think at the very root of it, they don't understand, like, it's a yearning for that connection to a place where so many people have been removed from place, right? By forced migration, those sorts of things.
Well, speaking of people that have been removed, recent news coming out of California has told us that we're actually going to see some people restored to their ancestral lands. The Esselen, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Esselen, Esselen tribe of Monterey County, California, has now been granted land that was already theirs, but 1,200 acres just south of Big Sur, a very popular resort area in the northern part of California. Desiree, I believe this is your neck of the woods. These aren't your people, but this is your region. This is a big deal for this tribe to be restored, any of its lands. According to KTVU.com, it marks the first restoration of any lands to the tribe, which lost 90% of its approximately 1,000 members to disease and other causes back in the 1800s when it was initially colonized by Europeans in the early 1800s, which is incredible. Little Bear Nason, who is the chairman of the tribe, says, quote, "It is beyond words for us. It is the highest honor. This land has been the most important thing to us. It's our homeland, the creation story of our lives. We are elated and grateful." Desiree, this land lies just on the north side of the Little Sur River, where the endangered steelhead fish spawn, and also encompasses old growth redwoods. People talk about Big Sur. I've never been to that part of the country, but they remark about how beautiful it is. And obviously, like I said, we're all on stolen land. But for this tribe, the Esselen tribe, to be restored 1,200 acres of their ancestral homelands, talk to us about what that must mean and why it's still not enough.
It's still not enough because I'm not sure that there's a way to ever repay or make whole what has happened. Something is going on in California that I'm keeping my eyes on, because I also know that the Ione Band of Miwok Indians recently had 380-something acres restored. What it means for communities, it can only speak for what it would be like for a Native Californian to grow up having access to land. So your spiritual connection gets, it's not broken, but it's changed and shifted when you don't have access to your ancestral territories, right? Like, the only way I can kind of describe it is you get out of balance. And so this means longevity for the children, the people. It means economic self-sufficiency. It's wonderful. They'll be able to have tourist dollars if they choose to, because they're a sovereign nation. They can do what they want on their land. It means a lot. And whenever I hear about, this is where, an endangered species spawns, like, Native children are endangered. So we have a good opportunity. I love to see when Native folks get any land back by any means, because being the path to genocide or attempted genocide is a very long one, and separation from land is a really deep wound. So when those children are able to have their children upon that land, when there's multiple generations that are able to have less restricted or full access to their territory, you start to have whole people that come out of it who are able to be resilient, who are increasingly self-sufficient, who, have land-based education, which is incredibly important and something that the American education system doesn't do. So I am elated and I am congratulatory to that community and that nation, because every bit of land back that Native people get is a win against the harms of colonization. And it's a tiny little suture up of the wounds that have been inflicted, right? It's not going to ever be enough. That has impacted our RNA. It has impacted our genetics, what has happened. But it is a step where you can find hope, that the children are going to be able to grow up in a place where they're meant to grow up.
Jen, when I saw this story, I was surprised, because when does the government ever give Native people anything that they are rightfully owed? And again, not being too familiar with the area, but just having heard about it, Big Sur, I'm like, oh, that sounds like a spot where white people find value, right? Like, and for them to give it back shocked me, to be quite honest. When you heard this news, because it almost is along a similar vein of the restoration of sovereignty of the tribes in Oklahoma as a result of the Supreme Court McGirt decision, which happened in recent weeks. Is the U.S. trying to get right in tiny increments, in your opinion?
I don't think that. I think this has just been addressed, but we have to constantly remember to not say, oh, America gave natives X, Y, and Z. This was our stuff to begin with. And it can sometimes be challenging to talk about, because our people, while all different, one of the sort of universal things that you will find, at least within the so-called US, is that Native people traditionally don't believe in a sense of ownership. So when I say ours, it's tough, because I want to recognize that this is Indigenous land, Indigenous resources, all of that. But also, I'm not talking about ours in the way that we think of owning land and owning resources, under settler colonialism and capitalism. So I think it's really important to always remember, anytime any Native nation has a win, it's not us being given something. It's us taking back a small piece of what was taken from us, what was stolen from us. And like Desiree said, nothing is ever going to undo the trauma and the genocide and everything that we have been through and that we still go through. I think that anytime, though, a tribe has a win, it's a win for all of us. Even though we are individual sovereign nations, anytime one of us wins, it makes it that much easier for us to win in our next court case. And as we've discussed here on First Nation Fridays, we are always in the courts, always. Fighting, always fighting. I think it's interesting with Big Sur, though. While I admit I don't know very much about California tribes, it's an area of that I need to learn more about. But I do find it interesting that this area that is so saturated with wealth is being put back under the control, to some extent, of the rightful people of that land.
I'm reading the story a little deeper here, Johnny J. And so the area that has been restored has been described as a spectacular property, initially owned by Axel Adler, who was a Swedish immigrant who bought the property in the 1950s and since died. But it was acquired by a conservancy and then they negotiated to purchase the property and transfer it to the Forest Service. But then the Conservancy started working with the Esselen tribe and received $4.5 million grant from the California Natural Resources Agency, who agreed to the purchase price and to pay for land studies. And the money came from a 2018 voter-approved parks and water bond that included $60 million for competitive grants to acquire Native American natural, cultural, and historic resources in California. And the chief of the tribe, or the chairman rather, says that they intend to build a sweat lodge, traditional village to conduct traditional ceremonies and teach the public about their culture. There will be no permanent homes or businesses on the land. Again, Jen, you raised such a good point, because it's like, how can I even talk about, should Native American tribes try to own more of their own land? Like, that's such a goofy premise. It's a rational premise from a colonialist capitalist perspective, but not from the Native perspective. How can we get more of this? How can we have more tribes restored to their ancestral lands, in your opinion? Like, what, besides taking it by force, which would be awesome, but how else can we facilitate more things like what has happened to the Esselen tribe in California?
It takes collaboration. I mean, that's the sad thing, is that, in order for, this tribe to get this land, they had to collaborate with a non-Native nonprofit group and depended on grant money and then to also trust them that once they got that money and made that purchase, that they would follow through and give that land to the tribe, which, thankfully they did. But, in Indian country, we often hear so many people, from nonprofits to celebrities, that are always like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to buy this Native land and we're going to give it back to Native people. Not too long ago, Johnny Depp made the claim that he was going to buy the property for Wounded Knee so that he could return it to the Native people in that area, ownership, give him ownership, but then he never followed through on it. So, that's something that we deal with a lot. Like, there's a lot of people, and I'm sure their intention is good. I'm sure they want to do good for Native people, but at the same time, there's not a lot of follow through. So I was really grateful that, they actually followed through on this, because it doesn't just benefit the Esselen tribe, because they have stated that they're going to also share that land with the Ohlone, I'm sure I'm butchering these, but the Ama Mutsun and the Rumsen people. So, it's not just one tribe that is going to be benefiting from this. It's going to be several tribes and communities. So, it's it's such a hard thing, because it's so bizarre that this is what it takes for us to get little bits and pieces of our land back, and for us to have agency over that land again. And, I think that the chairman of the Esselen tribe, he made a good point, which is that, we have always been stewards of the land. As Jen was saying, we don't necessarily think of ownership of the land in the same way that, a lot of people who are just into this capitalist system and the way they portray ownership, it's not the same for us. When we talk about lands, it's more like the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land, and we are responsible for caring for that land, for maintaining the relationship that we have to the land and the relationship that the land has to us, like through ceremony, through the medicines that it gives us. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it's so bizarre. Like, even to me now, just like, this is a good thing. This is something to celebrate. But in the back of my head, it's also like, wow, like, why did we have to go through so many agencies in order to get this little piece of land? And, even now, when you're talking about how do we get more land back, a lot of tribes have to buy back their own lands. And, that's something that is very hard for a lot of tribes to do, because they are not in the financial position to be buying back their own land. You look at Wounded Knee, I think the price that they put on that was something like $4.5 million, which was at the time impossible for the tribe to raise, because the offer was made for them first to buy that land. And it's such a weird thing too, that a land that is so rich in history, that, has historical, but also like spiritual connection to the people that belong to that land, that they have to be given that offer first. Like, it's just something I just can't get my head around. And especially now when we're looking at other projects being put on Native land, whether it's pipelines or other extractive industries, it's so terrible to think that the only reason that a lot of these industries are able to acquire that land or to get access to that land in order to exploit it is because we were not able to afford the price tag in the first place. So that's something that is really hard to reconcile with.
Mm-hmm. This was the 1850s was probably, or the 1800s was probably actually the second wave of colonization experienced by that community, as with most California tribes, right? So Columbus was found lost at sea by the Arawak Taino people. With him, came all of these men. They came with the backing of the Catholic Church, installed a whole bunch of missions, enslaved an assload of Native people under actually the auspices of Mexico. So the gold rush, when they say, oh, the community was impacted by disease and other things, those other things were gold rushers coming in and like not wanting to waste bullets on babies, so they would smash them up against rocks. Those are the other things that have happened to that community. So it's like with California Native people, I've said a couple of times, like our relationship with treaty is much different than some of the other tribes because of the history of what has happened with the Spanish and the Catholic Church, and then the gold rushers that came.
I wanted to move along, guys, and sort of circle back to something that we were talking about earlier, but relating it in a different way, not the white lady creating fake Twitter accounts to be a pretendian, but the issue of tribes who owned African slaves. And the chief of the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma has penned a letter condemning California Congresswoman Maxine Waters for her continued support and demand that the Choctaw Freedmen, a group of Afro-Indigenous descendants who are asking, demanding, insisting upon not only recognition, but citizenship or belonging to the Choctaw Nation. And Dwayne, let's pop open that Twitter thread. This from a group from, they call themselves the Choctaw Freedmen, Choctaw and Chickasaw Freedmen. Remember, the Freedmen are the descendants of Black and Afro-Indigenous slaves who were owned by the Choctaw masters and other freed people of African ancestry. The Choctaw Nation's vote in 1983 specifically did not take into account the descendants of freedmen in 1983. And this has been a protracted struggle happening with these Black folks who want to be recognized by the Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation. In the letter that the chief of the Choctaw Nation, Chief Batten, he argues that the Choctaw Nation has the right to deny the freedmen citizenship rights because in their constitution, which was passed in 1983, outright excluded the freedmen from citizenship. And we go on. And like I said, Gary Batten is the chief of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and he wrote this letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in which he condemned Maxine Waters for a recent move by Waters to advocate for the Choctaw freedmen rights per the Treaty of 1866. Now, I know we got some Oklahomans on the panel today, and I'm going to confess, ladies, I have heard about this. I used to live in Tulsa. That doesn't make me an expert on anything, but I have heard this issue raised before. And it's been not without controversy and not without some disputes about whether or not these tribes ever owned African slaves, and acknowledging for a moment that they did own African slaves, why are they denying citizenship to the descendants of these folks now? Jen or Johnny, I know you ladies have opinions and shed some insight on this, because it is a little confusing. And it's really about who you believe, and also why were the freedmen excluded from the Choctaw Constitution of 1983? Who wants to go first?
Well, this is my tribe, and I have feelings because as a Choctaw woman, and who also does a lot of advocacy work, one of the things that I always have to reconcile with in the work that I do, especially with the Black community, is that I do come from a tribe that had Black slaves. And with the freedmen issue, it's always going to be contentious. And I know it's hard for people on the outside to really understand where the Choctaws are coming from, because yes, part of it is anti-Blackness, but another part of it is rebellion against the U.S. Because when it came to slavery and the 5 civilized tribes, a lot of the 5 civilized tribes were almost forced into impossible decisions in order to survive. A lot of them had to make or try to make decisions that would kind of ensure their survival. You know, if we act more like them, then maybe they will let us stay here. Because when you think of the Trail of Tears, by then we had been very colonized and modernized, assimilated even, to the point that when we were leaving, when we were forced from our lands, we weren't just leaving traditional homesteads, we were leaving plantations. We were leaving cities that we had built for our Native communities. So it's not like we were just leaving our native villages. We were leaving entire cities and economies and huge plantations, farmlands that we had developed and that, yes, were worked by Black slaves that we owned. And when we went on the Trail of Tears, so did those slaves. So it wasn't just Native people on the Trail of Tears, it was Black people too. And all of us got settled in Oklahoma and were forced to try and survive there. And in Oklahoma, I do believe that a lot of the dynamics that existed before really did change. And what happened with the treaty in 1866 that kind of made tribes responsible for the Black slaves, because it was almost like punishment for siding with the Confederacy, that they would have to offer citizenship to the freed Black slaves, which honestly, we did anyway. Because if you're looking at kinship, if you're looking at the way that Native communities worked, the way that we developed kinship with each other, and not just, you know, who we claim, but who claims us, you know, we claim Black slaves as ours. So in the way that I think, they are absolutely Choctaw. There is no question about that. They are us because we took them in, and whether we bought them, whether they were slaves or not, we shared our languages. We taught them our traditions. You know, they were part of our community, even under subjugated conditions. So, but they were still part of our community. So they are therefore Choctaw in every sense of the manner, you know, to me anyway. So I don't think it's a matter, I think it's just a responsibility that we have to give them citizenship. There should be no denying of their descendanship, because, you know, once we got to Oklahoma, and even before then, we were intermarrying. You know, there are descendants of slaves who are also descendants of Choctaw people who owned them, you know what I mean? So it's a very complicated history, and it's one that gets very controversial because, yes, a large part of the denial of freedmen citizenship is anti-Blackness, which is so strife in Indian country. But a part of it is also rebellion, because they do feel like they were kind of forced into this. And because of that, they don't want to be held responsible or don't want to acknowledge that they were complicit in harming Black people or in that part of that history that is so ugly. And that, you know, Black people still feel the ramifications of today. And so, you know, reparations, citizenship for freedmen, I think is just just a given. Like, that should be no questions asked. Like, in my opinion, I think the 5 civilized tribes should be setting the example for how the U.S. should be making amends to Black people for slavery. And that's reparations. That's also returning land bases that were stolen from them as well. Because when you look at the history of Oklahoma, and a lot of people don't realize this, but when the Trail of Tears happened and before the land run happened, there were Native communities, like cities where, we all coexisted. But beyond that, there were entire Black cities that existed in Oklahoma that, just like the natives were pushed off our land during the land run, so were they, because that land was overtaken by the Sooners, So it's a very complicated history that people don't realize is there in Oklahoma, that there were free Black people there, that there were Black cities that felt the same impact that Native people felt because of the land run, and also, slavery, everything. Like, our histories are just so entangled that, to me, it's just a no given that their citizenship should be recognized without question. They should have the same benefits of our communities that we do, because they help build our communities as well. And they are a part of us through the shared histories, through the languages, through the traditions, through them being a part of our communities. They are Choctaw, they are Chickasaw, they are Seminole, they're Creek, and they're Cherokee. Like, that's just a given when you look at the dynamics of how Native communities create our kinship ties. Like, that's undeniable. And yes, I think it's hard for a lot of tribes to have to be told by the U.S., to have this, and yet again, another treaty forced on them, saying that they have to do this, this, and this because of this, this, and this. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that while it was a forced decision that we were making, nobody actually forced us to make that decision. It was something that we did in order to try and ensure our own survival. But so we do have to deal with the consequences of those choices. We did have Black slaves. That is an undeniable part of our history. And we do need to pay reparations. We do need to make amends. And we do need to make huge apologies to the Black community for that, in order for us to start mending a lot of those rifts that exist within our communities, and in order for us to really move forward and create unity between us. Because, the strongest weapon against, white supremacy is going to be when Black and Native people join forces and we strike those final blows together, because, the original sins of this country began with us and they have to end with us.
Let's let Jen, I want you to hop in here, because I'm curious, because I know, Black people who generally either believe through family lore usually claim Cherokee, right? Oh yeah, my great grandma was Cherokee because she had long, straight Black hair. How has the Cherokee Nation received their Afro descendants, to your knowledge?
Not so well, I would say, at least based on what I grew up seeing and what I know. On this particular issue, I'm just speaking for me and what I know and what I've seen. There were Cherokee people who did absolutely own Black people. Like, it did happen, and it is shameful. There's no excuse for it. And it's one of the very few things about being Cherokee that I actually do feel a sense of shame over. I want to point out, because I think that this is really important on a larger picture, that chattel slavery was not traditional amongst my people. I think that this is something that some of our ancestors took on partially in the process of assimilation, as Johnny's kind of talked about, is that there was this idea that if we just behaved like the white man, they'd leave us alone. And we know differently. That didn't work. But I think that was a little bit of what was going on. I think also, too, I need to look more into this, but one of my friends who is native out of Virginia had shared a while back that there was a tribe in Virginia. I apologize, I can't remember which tribe it was. I need to look into this more. But that they were told by the King of England that they could intermarry with white people, but if they intermarried with Black people, then they would lose all their lands. So the tribe ended up saying, okay, our people can't marry Black folks. So I think that there's a lot of anti-Blackness within Native community that must be addressed. But I think part of addressing any form of oppression is you go back to the root cause. And the root cause is partially the white man being all up in our business and telling us what we can and can't do. There was actually a court case not too long ago that said that Cherokee Nation had to give our Cherokee freedmen citizenship. And I still feel torn about it because, like, man, I believe strongly in tribal sovereignty, and I don't want the U.S. government telling us what we can and can't do and who our people are. I felt so on that one hand, I'm like, fuck the American government. How dare you tell us what we can and can't do? But then as a Cherokee Nation citizen, I felt such a sense of anger towards some of our quote, leaders and such, that they were leaving out our freedmen. Like, that is unacceptable. Like, some of our ancestors, for better or worse, whatever fucking reasons, decided to take part in the chattel slavery system. They decided to buy Black people and own Black people. And we have a responsibility to their ancestors to be there and to have them have citizenship. And that's another thing that I feel like is sort of part of the misunderstood part of being Native, is that it's not just whether or not you have the blood, it's whether or not you are a part of our community and whether or not you are part of our nation. Just like we think of American citizenship, there isn't, policy-wise, you could argue that we definitely in this country really like to favor white folks for citizenship. But there are people here who are citizens that aren't necessarily white, or whatever ideal that we have as a society of what American citizenship looks like. And I think that that is similar with tribal citizenship. Like, we can have citizens who don't necessarily have, the quote, blood quantum. I don't know. It's a very frustrating situation, like sitting back and watching this nonsense within Cherokee Nation, where I'm just like, why are we denying our relatives? Why are we denying our freedmen? Why are we also denying some of our mixed people who are both like Cherokee from the blood and Black? Like, but then there's also, like you mentioned, that story that everyone is Cherokee. So there's this constant feeling, at least I will say for me personally, anytime anyone says they're Cherokee, I'm like, really? What tribe are you? Who are your people? What, where do you belong? Because there's just such a larger misunderstanding of the whole mess.
Yeah, there's, like I said, very prevalent in African American, and not just my family. I mean, again, anyway, my family's interesting, but there are all these super light-skinned Black folks, in Central Virginia. And I think wanting to be part of Native culture or to claim, to be Pamunkey Indian was a way of denying the amount of white that is actually, in our blood for worse, can't say for better. But Desiree, anti-Blackness and colorism in Native culture, this is still very much ongoing, but it absolutely goes back to colonialism. So what can be done, to embrace more brown natives and the Afro-Indigenous people that definitely exist, not just the ones that, just we're told that their great grandmother was Cherokee somewhere, but no, the people who have done the research. There's a collection of folks, Black people who are seeking this citizenship with the 5 tribes in Oklahoma. I found this lady's YouTube page, and she was talking about how difficult it is to trace your ancestry, specifically about Oklahoma. I know you're not from Oklahoma, but just giving you an example. But because the Oklahoma Territory it was a territory. It wasn't a formalized state. There was no courthouse that kept records, and not as old and established as the East Coast was in terms of colonialist structures. But how do Native communities address anti-Blackness and the colorism issue that affects them as well?
Well, I mean, anti-Blackness is not acceptable, and I think it's going to take white coded natives like myself to be better at passing the mic. A lot of the same things around allyship for people with white privilege apply to white passing natives. And so internal to the community, anti-Blackness has to be fought like head on, nipped in the bud. There are some protocols around elders that make it difficult to speak back to Native elders if they're saying something that's super bigoted and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, Auntie, no. But it is important that there's pushback. We have to, within the Native community, reconcile that we have been pitted against the Black community. And it's really strange because so many Native families are mixed. Like mine is very mixed. And so I think it has to be nipped in the bud, and we can't let white supremacy reign. So, for example, sometimes in academia, and this maybe kind of circles us back to the whole beginning of the show, right? Like there need to be spaces created and the line held for Native people and Black folks, people who do not have the same like white privilege. Folks like me need to be just passing the mic. Like there's allyship 101 where that needs to be, I feel like, a little bit more strongly put forward, right? So when you have an entire like academia, an entire realm that is centered around white voices, white record keeping, white data sets, white perspectives about all these things, like the American public could do everyone a favor and develop some nuance to understand that, for example, a white coded Native, I'm not a person of color. And there is something to be said where we need to develop these racial understandings so that in between one another, we have the language to combat anti-Blackness, and then to actually put those prayers that say we're tired of these divisions into action, and to really look at what are the privileges that we have. If, maybe folks have class privilege, making space for Native and Black content creators in the tech space is a very, wealthy, white, cisgendered male space. And, I worry because I know that a really high percentage of white people voted in Donald Trump, and I'm worried that's going to happen again. And I know that white organizers have been trying really hard to work on white people and allyship. There's just going to have to be a lot more work done. And that includes for white passing Native people. There's a movement slogan about step up, step back. Like we need to normalize stepping back sometimes because American individualism encourages, especially white passing Natives, to step forward. When really it's because like there's a lot of non-Native people who decide who the gatekeepers are, or they'll pick a Native person that serves their viewpoint to get whatever it is done that they want. And because there's resources behind it, people are forced into these weird situational colonized behavior of things. So I don't know. I think that there's a lot of work that white passing Native people need to do to be in better allyship with Native people who aren't white passing or white coded and don't have the same privileges extended by, capitalist American society.
Ladies,
but we absolutely you have to face it and just be like, absolutely no. Like this ends with us because it's bogus.
Yes. And I think that's so important. Like as trauma, generational abuse has gone, throughout the generations, it's up to that last generation, that most recent generation, to say, nope, this is a wrap. We're not doing this no more. This stops right here. We are running a little short on time, ladies, but I wanted to definitely touch on some things. Obviously, COVID is having a disproportionate effect on the Native American population, really across the country. Anywhere where you find Indigenous people, you will find them being impacted by COVID more so than the white folks, basically. Such is the case in Wyoming, where half of the COVID deaths there have been Native people. We're also seeing a summertime tradition where powwows are being canceled nationwide because of COVID concerns. And in addition to that, COVID is taking a lot of Native elders, and the Cherokee Nation recently shared that 13 of their Native fluent Cherokee speakers died in the month of July, which is a staggering statistic. And they shared a video honoring those that have passed along. Let's take a look at that. The Cherokee video, not the hoop dancer. We're going to talk about him too. Jen, when you hear that 13 fluent Cherokee speakers have passed along in such a short amount of time, what type of loss is that for Cherokee Nation? I mean, how many people can fluently speak Cherokee in order for 13 of them to pass along in 1 month? I mean, that sounds like a huge number to me.
I apologize. I can't talk about it without crying.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm. No, my intent was not to upset you.
Oh, no. I know. We talk about hard shit on this show all the time, and it's shit that's got to be talked about. And I should say to any of our Native elders who are listening right now, I do apologize for cussing in this particular moment on this topic. Cherokee Nation, we have about 380,000 citizens. And that's a tiny amount of people. And I recognize that's still significantly larger than a lot of other tribal nations, but 380,000, that's not a lot of people, That's like, maybe half the population of DC where I live. Mm-hmm. When you lose 13 people in 1 month, that is significant. And the fact that they're all fluent language speakers, that is devastating. That is so much of our culture that's just lost, that can't be taught, that can't be passed down. When I hesitate to speak sometimes on this show or in other spaces, it's because I'm trying to figure out how to describe how I feel in a language that is not meant for me. I'm trying to describe the things that I think and feel as a Native and as a Cherokee in the English language, which is not really designed to be able to discuss those things. Our songs, our stories, our ways are so intrinsically tied to our languages, which are also intrinsically tied to our lands. And I'm not a language speaker. I know a couple of words. I know a couple of phrases. I'm trying my best to learn, but I am probably never going to be a fluent language speaker. The vast majority of our people, 40 and younger, don't speak our language. They don't speak Slagi. And losing 13 language speakers in 1 month, it's devastating, and it's also infuriating. I am so enraged at the losses that my people have had, as well as other Native nations. Navajo Nation, the White Mountain Apache, man, they have suffered fucking hard during this time. And a lot of this could have been prevented. It could have been prevented if the United States government honored its trust and treaty responsibilities to us. If the United States government and the state governments actually gave a damn about Native people, as well as BIPOC and disabled people. Because let's be real, if COVID-19 was taking out white, abled people, the way it's taking out natives and black and brown folks and immigrants and disabled people, man, the United States and the state governments, the city governments, they would be on top of this. There would be no nonsense about whether or not this is some sort of media hoax. But the fact that people like me are dying, it doesn't matter to our government. It doesn't matter to them, and they don't get this, and I apologize. I don't know how to talk about this in a way that feels, coherent and quote professional in the colonized world, because I just feel so much pain and anger over all of it. And I feel it as a Cherokee Nation citizen. I feel it as a disabled person watching what the disability community is going through. I feel it as a queer person. And I just recently really started talking about this in kind of a public way. I'm a former sex worker. Like, I'm looking at how all of the communities I come from and my loved ones, my friends, my family, I'm seeing how we're suffering under this pandemic in ways that is just unconscionable, and there is absolutely no reason for it other than blatant just oppression.
You have nothing to apologize for, Jen. This is a loss for your community and for the larger extended indigenous community, as well as you mentioned, other tribes are absolutely suffering. Desiree and Johnny, I'm gonna let you guys hop in here and get the last words. Desiree, I mean, from where you are, how have you seen COVID and also really the piss poor response from not only the White House on down to the state governments deal with marginalized communities who are feeling the effects of this way more than the mainstream of America?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that Jen's tears are probably hundreds of years old, because this isn't the first virus. This isn't the first major loss of life. These are very old tears. And I think that that's something to know about Native people, is we all, other communities have the same kind of thing that I've witnessed, where that historical trauma, it may seem on the surface like, Jen, I definitely am not trying to speak for you, but, even if you didn't know those people, they're still your people. There's still been significant loss of life in these big ways that hit you like this. And so I really, my heart goes out to you. I understand what you're feeling. in Colorado, the governor, Jared Polis, has been, we talked about this some time ago, has been housing houseless relatives on top of a Superfund environmental cleanup site. And most of the women are located indoors where that Superfund cleanup site is. So the air is toxic. I really think that it is so indicative of how the system is built to eradicate, well, everyone except for the global elite. And no matter whether it's urban natives or folks who don't live in cities, you know, maybe live in towns, maybe live on the reservation, there's a whole bunch of different contexts Native people live in. We're all, it's kind of like watching it in slow motion, right? Because we've seen, if you look at what has happened with indigenous people to this continent, they brought it, like, disease was brought here, suffering was brought here, all of these things were brought here. And so if people who are non-indigenous want to understand what the hell is going on right now, like, why are so many people being chewed up and just spit out of the system, you really need to understand the history of what has happened. And so looking into that history, looking at how Native people have been treated, I believe is what the rest of Americans who are not billionaires, which is everybody, basically, what can be expected. It doesn't matter if you're a poor white cisgendered woman, it doesn't matter. You will be chewed up and you will be spit out. The system does not give a shit. So if you want to know what's going on, like, learning indigenous history here, learning about the doctrine of discovery and colonialism and capitalism, like, going down a rabbit hole and just doing some research will really help you understand what's going on. Like, this is not a surprise. And I don't know any Native people that are surprised at how this is going down, right? When they were receiving body bags instead of PPE. Like, so standard. Like, it's so standard. It's insulting. Like, so, I don't know. I look at it and I'm like, of course this is being handled with armed guards and armed police officers and mercenaries. Of course. This is the system working as it is built, and we need to break it. This isn't like the system's broken and we need to fix it. No, this is how it works and it needs to be broken.
I mean, Johnny J, what Desiree just said, so profound about Jen's tears being hundreds of years old. I mean, Natives have been targeted with virus, with disease, intentionally for this exact purpose. So this has got to feel so horribly familiar to so many indigenous people on this continent, to see how COVID is attacking you specifically.
It is. It does feel personal, especially for me because, I have two cousins that had COVID and recovered. My aunt and my uncle both had COVID. My uncle passed away after 65 days of fighting COVID.
I'm so sorry.
And that's something that I have a hard time still, understanding is real because he should still be here. And, and I see so many of my friends too, every day you see somebody saying that their cousin has passed away, their grandma, their grandpa. I have a friend on the Navajo reservation who lost her mom and lost her grandparents in the same weekend and to COVID. And, like Jen said, it was preventable. Like, none of this had to happen. Like, the suffering that we're seeing in Indian country right now because of this pandemic, like, it didn't have to be this way. It didn't. And, we knew from the very beginning that we were going to get hit hard. None of us were under the illusion that it wouldn't be this way. We knew what to expect because this is the way that it's always been for us. We knew we were going to be the most impacted. We knew we were going to be the ones left out. of the data, of the resources. We knew that we were going to have to fight every step of the way to make sure that we could survive this. And you see our people doing so much on a community level, as far as like making sure that elders have food and water. There's some terrific efforts being made in South Dakota right now where there are some wonderful Native women who are putting together care packages for Natives who are quarantining or who have been diagnosed with COVID and have to be away from their families. They're putting together baskets of food and traditional medicines to help them. We see it on the Navajo reservation. I have a friend who for years has been doing so much on so little to help his community, Lauren Anthony. And, he chops firewood for elders. And through this pandemic, they've been taking food donations, putting together packages. They've just done so much. And you see that happening throughout Indian country and all our communities on local levels, like people doing the best that they can. And, it's really hard because, just this year, my family has been hit so hard, not just with COVID. Even before the pandemic, I lost my Uncle Bruce. So to lose my Uncle Dale, that was really hard. But we've also lost a couple of grandpas as well. And, it's just so hard because I see my family dwindling. And, I know that so much of it is preventable if we had only had the resources to take care of our elders the way that we needed to take care of those who are sick. And, if there's anything that has really been eye-opening through this is that those resources are available. Look how quickly in the beginning that, the government moved to make sure that the unemployment, people would have $600 extra through their unemployment, that, they were putting together all these stimulus packages and saying, look, we're going to give $4 million, we're going to give billions of dollars to these industries or to this, and this. Like they were pulling out resources out of their ass so easily, and yet we're still fighting for nothing. And, they can't tell us that those resources are not there, that they are not available, because they are. They're just withholding them. And it is an act of cruelty, not just on the Native people, but on the entire U.S., because we could be doing so much better right now. And it's not just hitting, the Native community hard. It's hitting Black people. It's hitting Latino. It's hitting a lot of poor communities, marginalized communities. And it's also affecting white people as well. And it's so beyond me that, it's become such a political division around this pandemic, instead of all of us looking at each other like, hey, we need to realize that in this moment, we need each other. And we need to focus our efforts on the government. We need to focus our efforts on making sure that we do have the resources we need, because they are available, instead of looking at each other like we're the enemy and treating each other as if we're the enemy and being angry with each other when we're not the problem. And, the whole division, the infighting that we see with each other, trying to debate whether a mask will help or not, and being angry at those who wear masks or who don't wear masks, and all of this, it's just nonsense. And it's the same division that has just always been there. It's been there to keep us divided. It's been there to keep us from focusing on the real problem and from focusing on where the real solutions are. And, they've done such a great job at it, because look at the US right now. We are so divided and we're all suffering, and yet we're more about fighting with each other than we are fighting the system that, as Desiree put it, it's absolutely working the way it was designed to. This is what it was supposed to do. And it does need to be broken. It does need to be dismantled. And, it's possible. It's not something that's just a pipe dream. It's something that we could and should be doing.
I mean, we are all part of groups that the United States would rather see go, right? So understanding that, it's so important to know that the state, which never looked out for us in the first place, is going out of its way to deliberately fail us at this time. So as much as all of us, and not just us on this call, but everyone that's watching, you guys, you have to look out for yourself at this point. Well, I'm not sure what that is, what that looks like. It definitely involves wearing a mask. It absolutely involves practicing as much hygiene and social distancing as you can, because we don't know when this is going to end. The projections for COVID right now, y'all, they're talking, I mean, just it's such a mind-boggling number. 300,000 people possibly dead by December, and most of those people are going to be Black and brown people. Okay. So even if you are a white person watching this, we need y'all to talk to y'all people. Okay. Collect them, tell them that this is not a game. And even if COVID doesn't impact you in a fatal sense, it could easily kill somebody else. It could easily kill the next person and then their family members. So we live in unprecedented times, guys. This is something that nobody really walking the planet has had to deal with. But we have to save ourselves. So please just do that as much as possible. And Johnny and Jen, my hearts just absolutely break for the losses, suffered in your families and in your communities. And I want to thank you guys for being open and vulnerable to share those emotions with us. And I got to thank you guys. And I'm sorry to end on this kind of note. I love doing these First Nation Fridays because, again, they're so informative and so eye-opening and heart-opening. I know people all in the comments are talking about how much they learned today and how much they learn in general from these discussions. So I want to thank you all. Jen Derenwater, Desiree Kane, Johnny J. Follow all these women on Twitter, gang, because they share a lot. And it's all stuff that we as non-Native people need to be tuned into. So ladies, thank you again. Okay. Well, guys,
thank you.
Well, thank you. Catch you on the next one.
Yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. And we're gonna talk about the real stories. We're gonna dig up good news though. We're going to talk about more Native wins because Natives are winning. And it's important for us to celebrate those victories, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge the losses. So gang, I appreciate y'all checking us out here on Stir Crazy. Again, we'll see you next Tuesday, next Thursday, next Friday, and not next Friday, but the following Friday will be the next First Nation Friday. So you guys, please be safe. Have a good weekend. Protect yourself as much as you possibly can and your friends and your family from COVID-19. Take care.